Hi, my name's Laura Clapper, and I'm here today with composer Alex Ford, whose piece "Pan for Solo Flute" was a winner of the Flute New Music Consortium Solo Flute Category for 2019 for the composition competition. Alex, thanks for being with me here today.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, some of your musical background and training, and what you're currently up to these days?
Yeah, so I'm a pianist background, really. I came to composition quite late and studied in London, studied composition as an undergrad. Really enjoyed that. And then took a little bit of time away, did some teaching, and recently finished my master's degree and in composition, and looking to go on and do doctorate next.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
so that's all really exciting. But my background is really piano, rather than I didn't really have I didn't really look at doing music till quite late. So I didn't kind of have a second instrument as I was growing up, really, like a lot of more serious musicians do. So it's a little bit. It's always kind of felt a little bit uphill. Yeah, but really exciting to kind of have the opportunity to talk to you guys, because for me, I'm still blown away by the things that my friends and contemporaries are doing. So kind of being recognised is super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoy your piece, by the way. Can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to write Pan for solo flute? I did get to look at your website a little bit, and I know you have some information on there, but maybe you could just share with us what inspired you to do that.
Yeah, so one of the things I don't really mention on the website, so the piece is, I mean, obviously Debussy and Syrinx is a huge influence for that piece. Not kind of directly musically, but more in the idea, in the kind of inception of it. It's kind of trying to tell the other side of the story, and it's I think part of it is just that I love Greek myth, and myth itself is a really interesting way of kind of looking at society, and kind of informs you a lot of what values are and those sorts of things. So with Pan in particular, with the piece that I wrote, it's kind of got two roles. One of them is to be a little bit of a provocateur, because I feel like there's so in the story of Pan and Syrinx, where the traditional way it's told, Pan's quite aggressive, and the end of the story is quite objectifying, and I wanted to kind of put something out there which was trying to explain that sort of thing, and almost in an apologetic way. And if we look at the things that's out in the media at the moment, with people like Harvey Weinstein and some of those things that have happened, it's quite the narrative that comes out from those can be quite apologetic, and kind of the nastiness of it is explained away. And so hopefully in kind of doing that, it might make some people feel a little bit uncomfortable that that's how it's being explained, because it doesn't feel like the correct way. It doesn't feel like the most truthful way of telling it. But on the other side, it's then representing both sides of the argument, or from seeing the myth from both perspectives. And so I just thought it was quite an interesting way of kind of looking at that sort of aspect of it.
Wonderful. Yeah. So you feel a little bit like your inspiration came from myth, but also kind of from things in today's culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's, because Greek myth especially is so rich, you really get a sense of, and we know who the popular heroes were, so we kind of know what values they really appreciated because of those heroes and what those heroes kind of espoused. Um, and so from that, I think it's quite interesting, kind of comparing the two and looking back, and even looking back to Debussy's time, and kind of what was important then. And it's, I don't know, I think it forms a kind of, it helps to say something about humanity as a whole when you're kind of drawing a line over 2,000 years of kind of this myth being represented.
So Alex, tell us a little bit about some inspirations you've had as a composer or even just as a musician. What kind of music are you drawn to? And
Um,
yeah.
so the music that I kind of listen to the most is, I in terms of composers, it's probably kind of early 20th century that's interests me the most. So looking at like Debussy, Stravinsky, um, maybe a little bit later, Bartok's quite a big inspiration. But um, I listen to some more popular music as well, listen to a little bit of jazz. But I also try to not listen to music quite a bit. And especially if I've got an idea for something, I struggle sometimes to keep listening to lots of things if I've got an idea of my own. It kind of pushes it out. So I kind of feel like I need the headspace sometimes. And so, yeah, I'll often go maybe a week or two sometimes without listening to any music, which is quite strange for someone that's kind of in that world. But I find that it really helps me creatively to be able to do more, because I'm not just kind of in awe of what all of these amazing composers are doing, which is kind of what it's like. It's very exciting, and I think you kind of, all musicians do really, but you start to analyze the music, and you can't help but kind of get your teeth into it. And when you're, for me at least, when I've got a piece of my own that I'm working on, I kind of struggle to do both do both of those things. And so, yeah. But like I say, it's kind of that early 20th century stuff is probably the era that I enjoy the most.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that stuff too, that era. I wonder, how did you begin composing? You said you're a pianist by training. What drew you to composing in particular?
I just found it was really expressive, and I felt probably more a statement of me as a performer, but I felt that I could express myself better through composition than I could through performance. And I really enjoyed the compositional study. I didn't enjoy the more the studying aspect of practical work in the same way. Like, I'd be happy to read books on composition, whereas kind of sitting down for hours on particular pieces, I'd find more difficult to kind of motivate myself to do those things. And so I kind of, it's kind of went through improvisation and playing around a little bit with that to then just going all out and, I want to do this. But I just find it extremely satisfying to do, and it feels like after a while, without composing something, I just need to write something else. Otherwise it just stays in my head.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have a favorite instrument or ensemble that you like composing for in particular?
Probably flute is
Really?
my favorite instrument. Yeah, it's the
The right
I
answer
think
for this interview.
yeah.
I'm just
I think the thing is with the flute is that it's part of the way that I write. I'm really interested in the color of the instrument, and there's such a rich, there's such a difference in the registral timbre of the flute, and it and also dynamic timbre as well. So you can say so much with just one instrument. And I just find it quite liberating. Well, I mean, I suppose just generally speaking, I find the woodwinds more um, slightly easier to write for because
Hmm.
it's easier to play around with the color like that. Whereas, kind of, I don't know, I'd be much more comfortable writing a wind quintet than a string quartet, for example.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, but in particular the flute.
So you say you really like writing for woodwinds. What do you find most challenging about writing for the flute in particular? Or what was a challenge you faced in writing pan or other pieces you have written for flute?
I mean, the biggest challenge is that I don't play the instrument. I'm not a very good flautist, so it makes it very difficult when it takes um, a lot of study, talking to flautists that I know, um, and trying to really understand the instrument mechanically in order to write something that's quite sensitive to the performer, um, which is something that's really important to me because I feel like it's in terms of getting I feel like some composers might think that they do all the hard work and then the performers play, but I feel such a duty to the performer to try and help them to get the most out of the piece
Mhm.
and to be able to communicate the piece through them. But if I didn't really think as much about what was happening mechanically, then I kind of wouldn't be doing my job. So I try and put a lot of time into um, trying to understand what I'm asking a performer to do. Um, but it is particularly difficult, you know, in terms of understanding where the difficulty is in a piece,
Mm.
and what particular things you know a concert level player might be looking for. It's a little bit more difficult for me to kind of spot those things straight away. Although as I write more and speak to more people and kind of get a bit more experience with it, I feel like I'm getting a broader understanding, um, and that's certainly getting a little easier.
That's great. Do you have other pieces for flute or flute with other instruments? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about other things you've written.
Yeah, so there's I wrote a piece for my mum, um, which was for uh, flute and piano, which kind of plays on kind of the flute is it's like the flute is me and the piano is her, and so and that was written. It's quite neat actually. So the piece was written for a Mother's Day concert um, in the US, but your Mother's Day and our Mother's Day is slightly different. So I got to show her the piece when I finished it, and then it got performed at the Mother's Day concert a month or so later. So that's really nice how that actually worked out. But so there's that piece, which is quite short, but I think it's quite nice the interplay between those. But then the other kind of bigger piece that I've written is an educational wind quintet piece, um, which it's kind of like a little bit similar to Peter and the Wolf in terms of it's it's intended to be used to try and teach, but through a narrative. Um, but I found so I I teach in a primary school. I teach music in a primary school, and I found that I really struggled to try and get particularly young kids to understand or to be able to recognize an instrument from listening to it.
Mm.
And if you just play them an instrument, they're not engaged enough to really connect with it and understand it and remember it. Whereas when it's the character from something, it's much easier for them to recall that information. And then you just have to tell them to change the name of the instrument rather than the name of the character. Uh, but I found that Peter and the Wolf was quite tricky because it was all of the instruments are kind of used together more than just isolated and on their own. And so I wanted to do something that it kind of uh, had each instrument playing significantly first. And so that's what I did, and it's a story about a snake in an English woods, which tricks a bunch of other animals. And so you get
Which instrument is the snake?
the snake is a clarinet.
Okay.
So very smooth, and the story kind of starts with you kind of get all of the characters one after the other. So you hear each instrument on its own, and then the snake tricks each character. So you get the clarinet with each instrument, and try and get them to start picking out which one they can hear. See if they can pick the clarinet out each time.
That's so cool.
And then you get the characters kind of team up on the snake, come up with a plan to get rid of him, and so then you get 4 of them on their own without the clarinet, and then you get the finale with everything together. And I found that particularly fun to write, and I've looked at it since with the kids at school, and it seems to do its job at least, which is really nice. And so that's one of the other pieces that involves flute that I've kind of worked on, but that's quite a bit bigger than pan. I think with narration it ends up about 25, 30 minutes, something like that.
Wow, that sounds really fun.
It's a really fun piece.
Yeah, and I'm sure your students love it. That's really great.
Yeah, it's a really nice one.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thanks so much for meeting with me today for this interview. I'd like to know if you want to share anything else with us about, music or the compositional process, or something really inspiring that you've encountered over the years.
So I don't mind talking about my compositional process. So I'm quite a slow writer. It takes me quite a long time to write things, and so it's not exactly maybe the most artistic sounding, but basically I sit down to write for about, I don't know, as much spare time as I have when I have a particular idea, and hope that something comes through. And it's pure blunt force rather than any finesse or technique. But I feel like finding my way is part of it, and rather than having something that I go back to every time, kind of taking the time for an idea to gestate and find its legs before I just kind of go back to the same, the same well. It means that I get way more out of composing, and I have done that before, where I've gone back to writing something with a similar start, or using a similar idea just to get something off the ground, and kind of got annoyed at myself that it just takes ages for me. So I just kind of take a long time to sit down and go through things, although that's not very fun when it's deadline time.
I can imagine. That's great, though. I'm very fearful of composition, so I admire what you do.
So am I.
Fighting a good fight, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Alex, thanks again so much. On behalf of FNMC, we're really happy to have you featured as one of our composers. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.